All righty. So today I want to go into something that we kind of go into from time to time in these sovereignty classes, but kind of spend a little time to just sit on this a little bit tonight. When we are going into, and by the way, remember, you are the master, right? You got to remind yourself that you are the master, you are the teacher, you are becoming. If you are not, you are going to come into who you be. You are becoming the master. You are become. You have become. Matter of fact, the command doesn't say you must become it. The command is become. So you are the master. You should be able to teach this. You should be able to live this. You should be able to give this to those around you in different forms, places, etc., and even different countries if necessary. Now that we've established that you are the master, which didn't need me to establish that because you were that before the foundation of the world. Today we want to talk about the significance of our canonical viewpoint of making sure that the Bible, so to speak, or that spirituality, or people would try to get you to go different ways, use different word usage, but to see the importance of it in law. Because an unfortunate occurrence that's happened when people have been taught about law is that people believe that law is separate from spirituality. And nothing could be further than the case. People believe that law is separated from spirituality. And people have been raised on this, and nothing could be further from the case. We've made little hints here or there, especially if you're taking sovereignty 1 or sovereignty 2 before you, and maybe even sovereignty 3. Maybe we've done this before. We've hinted at this, where obviously there are certain things that we cannot deny mean that somebody's talking about spirituality. Now, what they're trying to do with this, with spirituality, what they're trying, see, what a lot of people are trying to do through people's canon or through their viewpoint or through their lens, through their spiritual belief, is they're trying to get them, like, what is it that somebody's trying to get you to do? What's the reason why straw man was made once again? If we were to try to make it, what is the reason your straw man was created?
For us to hand over authority for someone to operate financially on our behalf, or to
Mm-hmm.
falsely flip over like who you are so that somebody can utilize it for gain, I guess.
Right, right. So they're trying to get you to use something real, or to use your authentic self to use your inauthentic, or to allow your inauthentic self, right, to have sovereignty. Basically, you are the sovereign, but you're trying to give up your sovereignty to somebody else, right? You might be hungry for something, right? Here goes um Jacob. You might be hungry for, or I'm sorry, here goes Esau. You might be hungry for something, and forfeit your birthright, right? Your right of birth. You might give it up at birth, right? Or somebody might give it up because they're hungry for something that they think they're getting. I'm getting protection. I'm getting money. This person be able to get a job. This person be able to go to school, right? And we're giving up the person's rights right from the beginning because we're hungry for something that, if we had just had the patience or learned, or et cetera, whatever the case might be, then we might not have to worry about those things anyways. So, right. So when you go to spirituality, what's one of the things that happens in a court right off the bat that we can think of? What's something that happens in court where they're literally trying to get you to use something that you believe to allow something that is not who you are to happen, or to take authority?
Swearing on the Bible.
Swearing on the Bible. Yep. Yep. There you go. Sister Raina saying the same thing in the chat. Swearing on the Bible right off the bat. Right. you put your you put your left hand on there and you put your right hand up. Right. And by the way, we could do we could do some research if you want to go down a rabbit hole on your own time. I won't do it to you tonight, because especially since we started a little late. But if you want to go down a rabbit hole, look at all the deities, gods, your regions, etc., the Baphomets, etc., all these things that all have their right hand up, two fingers. Kind of crazy, the stuff that they're doing. But you put your hand on the Bible first, and then put your right hand up And what you're going, there's an oath. Remember what does an oath mean, by the way? What is, if you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? What is the oath again? What is an oath? A promise?
A pledge or promise to a deity.
A pledge or a deity. I promise God. Do you swear to tell the truth, so help me God? Once you answer, you made a promise, you made an oath. See, so as much as people would like you to believe that spirituality is not part of it, right? I saw Sister Raina, I think you said in the comments earlier as well, when they asked you to say your name. Why is your name so important? See, people are so quick to be like, it doesn't matter what the name of the Most High is. It doesn't matter what his son's name. It doesn't matter what the Holy Spirit's name is. It does, because what does your name mean?
Your name is your Shem, it's your authority.
It's your Shem, your authority. Whatever you name something, you've authorized it to do that thing. Right? You ever been around people and people say something and be like they'll be like, "What's your name?" And somebody says, "Oh, Kimberly," and they say, "Oh yeah, you look like a Kimberly." Somebody says, "What's your name?" It's Kofi. "Oh, you act like a Kofi." You be like, "I act like a Kofi." What you mean? But you'd be surprised. Like what your name is, you get authorized. Some things are put on you. You got to be careful what you authorize, right? So state your name. Now, once again, what is the name they're looking for? Because you can state a name that's not written down. First of all, stating your name is optional, anyways, right? Because you have the right to remain silent, even in court, right? Anything that you say or do it will be used against you. So you don't have to state anything anyway, but you have the right to state a name that you go by. So people go, "Oh, that's not your real name. Why is it not my real name?" Especially if I'm part of a people in that nation, that's what they name me. And I know that this name that you've given me is not that, or even if it was given by my parents didn't know about a straw man, nor did they know that I was taking on a name that has nothing to do with my people and my culture. So that doesn't have to be my name. There you go. Yep. The- I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It reminds me of some of the TikToks that I watch, and it's like an interrogation, and the guy's like, "So, what your grandmama call your name?" My grandma called my mama Mama. Baby, go tell your mama. My mama, that's what you call.
Hmm.
It's because that's what they're known by.
Hmm. Yeah. And so when people talk about your name, right, when they're trying to say state your name, they're trying to get you to agree with that all caps, right? They're trying to get you to get that all caps. Matter of fact, if you go to other countries, that's why I say the straw man thing is not just American; it's worldwide, right? Because um, people's rights were taken away from them worldwide, right? Common law is British rule, coming from Roman rule, coming from Greek rule, right? Coming from, the Medes and the Persians, coming from Babylonians, coming from Kemet, even coming from Mesopotamia, coming from Assyria. Like these are certain things, even things that we're talking about with I think we talked. Oh, did we talk about it in Sovereignty 3? Or see, these things run together. We talked about it here or Black's Law Dictionary 1, but when you're talking about forgive me, y'all. What's the Druids? The Druids who got their stuff from Canaan. We don't even make that correlation, but we don't know that they traveled over there, right? And they're using some of the same things. And those laws, though, these straw men were things that were used back then, right? That's why, um, for example, does anybody know the prophet Daniel's real name?
And I, I, I know that he was given a name that
Hmm.
was Belteshazzar, I think, or it was. Man, I was just reading this. Oh my goodness,
You were close.
Belshazzar.
You were close, yeah. So, and by the way, it was a trick question because Daniel's real name was actually Daniel. Now, the reason I say that, you're going to see why in a second. Daniel's real name was Daniel or Daniel, but Daniel. Daniel's name he was given, his straw man, was Belteshazzar. And we don't know. So they did that. They gave you a name once you were conquered so that you would go by their name. And Daniel was young, and they gave Daniel while he was young. What they did is they would conquer you, sometimes kill your king off or whatever, and kill their people that were going to be heirs to the throne. And sometimes they might take the heir to the throne and adopt them so that they can say they had some kind of right to your throne. But and then get the child to fall in love with them, so that the child would actually grow up, loving them and not wanting anything to happen to them, and therefore like giving them rights to the land. Like there's a lot of stuff that's going on here that still goes on in a sense. But Daniel was one of the teenagers in the court. At least we believe he was a teenager, 15, 16 or so. And when they were conquered. And so when he's conquered, or when they're conquered and he's taken in, they would take people from the court, especially the young boys and young girls, and they would have them grow up in the court to where they would start to take on the principles of the one who captured them. So Daniel was given a straw man, and so he was not supposed to answer to Daniel. He was supposed to answer to Belteshazzar. That's who he was in their eyes. But he was always Daniel or Daniel, right? But then there's three Hebrew boys we know about, right? What are their names? What are the three Hebrew boys that we know their names from Daniel? What's their names we know them by?
I kind of jacked up the first one. I'm gonna say I know Abednego,
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? So those are actually Babylonian names. Many people don't even look. It tells you their names, but because even when reading the story, if you're not careful, right, you'll see it from a Babylonian context. Here are these three guys who are going, and so they're even talked about in Babylonian terms, but that's not their names. You're actually told in that. Matter of fact, in Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, it tells you that Daniel asked for more time, and when he got the time, he actually prayed with these three Hebrew boys, and their actual Hebrew names are Ananiah, Hananiah, Asariah. So it was Daniel, Ananiah, and by the way, you hear Yah's name or title in all the names of my people who are called by my name. So Daniel, Al, like Elohim, Ananiah, Yahweh, Azariah, Yahweh, Hazariah, Yahweh, right? But we know them as a straw man, even to this day. We know them as what they were thrown into the fire as. But see, they were thrown into the fire as a straw man. See, like this context and this concept is something that's been in existence by people who were using law all the time to try and get people to identify with something that they were not, right? Rather than who they actually were. This was a common theme, a common thing that was done over and over and over again. So you have Ananiah, Hananiah, Azariah, and Daniel. So I'm saying all that to say, like, there's things that are constant and consistent going back to the name. So you got the Bible, you got the name, you've got people that just start speaking. By the way, do you understand? And all you're getting, get a what? An understanding. So whatever you're getting, you got to do what? Stand under it. So in court, they ask you, do you understand? It's spiritual, right? They're using biblical principle because the West is supposed to be what is it? The West is supposed to be known. Well, if you are English, which many people were under English rule at some point, right? Or even if you're French, it's a little different. If you're Portuguese, it's a little different. If you're Spanish, right? They have slight variances. But we specifically who are listening in tonight, and more than likely those listening in the recording, if you are what's the term? Yeah, if you're English, then what was your religion? What is the religion of the people that you are as English? What is your religious history as far as what you're supposed to be under now? What's the rule that you're under religiously?
Like Catholic?
Close. Close. Protestant, right? I say close because technically Catholic does not necessarily mean Roman Catholic. A lot of people don't know that. So there's only really three types of Christian that's out there. A lot of people, because they all are basically coming from Rome. So there's only really three types of Christianos. You're either A, Roman Catholic, which is the Western Empire when it split. You're B, Eastern, or I'm sorry, Orthodox Christian, which is the Eastern Empire, or you're somebody that split off when England, King Henry VIII, wanted to do his own thing and became the Pope of his own religion, a grassroots movement that he made into his own religion. And that's when you started having words be put into English as a middle finger to the Pope when he became his own Pope. And that's when, and because English was always considered to be the language of the poor, and the poor spoke it because it was a jumbled language. Many poor people, po folk, us po folk, we start doing interesting things with words, right? But if you're rich, you are supposed to be the person who speaks properly, right? That you would be surprised that I've said this before, but think about East Coast, right? East Coast Southerners actually speak better English than almost everybody else. Just because they have a twang doesn't mean, even people who do what you call slang, they use English slang, like Lil Wayne, Lil Yachty. I don't know all the Lils, forgive me. Lil Boosie, Lil, Lil Baby, whatever, right? That comes from the British. Little, you want a little, you want a little bit, right? You're using the same stuff, right? So actually, Southerners speak great English. We just don't think of them as speaking English anymore, but that's because a lot of the English people came down to the South. Matter of fact, where did a lot of English people leave from when the Civil or when the Revolutionary War is going on? They start leaving from the South. you know, George Washington, Virginia slave owner, was fought for the British. He would have sounded very English, right? So the Northerners actually have other languages that are popping up more so, but the Southerners, especially, they're dealing more with the British, especially when you start getting into the slave trade and them doing the slave trade going from down there and going across the pond, so to speak, right? But there's a lot of stuff that's in there. So when you're dealing with a lot of these words, even the legalese and the common law, right? The legalese, common law. We talked a little bit about common law. Well, we talked a lot of bit on here, but specifically as far as common law being specific to us, looking at how the English commoners used them. So a lot of our laws are also based off of the laws that were common over time until about the 1800s when they just brought all of the laws and made them one common law. Common law was, well, this is common to Ireland. This is common to London. This is common to Old Town. This is common to this lord. This is common to the Dutch of this. This is common to the Duke of blah, blah. Like all of them had laws in different places that were common law. So if you went to somebody else's territory, it was a common law. Now, whenever you talk about common law, especially the way most of us think about it, we're only, and especially in court, we're thinking about all these things that they brought together and tried to make common. But all of them only really had three major laws. The rest were statutes. What are the three major laws again? First law, don't hurt anybody. Second law, don't steal from anybody. Third law, don't lie to anybody. Everything else is a statute, right? An optional thing that really goes to, and if you're honorable, some of those optional things you should follow because you shouldn't break any of those three major laws, right? That's how Western law or common law comes into effect. So if it was common for them, right, now we got to get into these terms now. If it was common for them to follow a Protestant Jesus, then that means that our laws are based off of a Protestant Jesus. You see that? That's why spirituality is key. If it was common for us, right, or not for us, if it was common for English folk to have to bow down to Protestant law, and they ran the whole world off of Protestant law. For example, what was it that allowed slavery to exist? Why was chattel slavery okay?
Because the scripture was they tried to talk that it was that and so he kind of became something that was looked at as a norm, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So they took scripture, right? Yeah, and they took it and twisted. And they say, first of all, like even certain things they had to what redefine legalese. So you hear Cain was marked. They started teaching once, especially when they started going heavy into Negro land and places in Africa and the Caribbean and stuff like that. They started saying marked means black. Cain was turned black. So if you're not careful in law, you'll think that mark. Now, once again for us, when we talk about the Tav, we know the Tav is a place that's marked, completed, finished, perfected, and can even mean the cross, right? But they will use the same Bible in legalese, and they even taught slaves who had their own services, right? They would choose pastors that the overseer would be over, and the pastors would preach these sermons, right? These pastors would preach these sermons, and they would preach these sermons, and they would have to make sure that the overseer was okay with it. And they were taught, they would choose them just like you choose somebody out of a court. They would take these young children and develop them, that they said, you got talent, boy, right? I reckon we should teach you, da 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 da. And they would teach these boys to remain boys and to believe whatever they said, and even to read versions of the slave Bible, because they didn't know there were other books. So these people grew up believing that, oh, well, I guess we're supposed to be slaves, even though the word slave didn't even exist when the Bible was originally written, right? But they're using a spiritual thing to rule over. Right? This is why we're not supposed to mix and match with other cultures, not because you black, white, whatever, because you can have somebody that's black that's still bringing in somebody else's culture. I know, lawfully speaking, don't be black on paper, but you hear what I'm saying, right? You can have, not all skin folk is kinfolk. You can have somebody that's coming in and trying your best to even, so they think, help you, but it's a Sambo spirit. They could be involved in something that somebody else's culture might be manipulating something, might be dealing with you as a straw man and not your actual self. And next thing you know, you're into some stuff that you shouldn't be into. You're into some stuff you shouldn't be touching. You're into some stuff that makes you feel lesser than. You're into a society to where you didn't even realize, wait a minute. So every time I wrote down African American, I said I wasn't a real person. Yeah, it's artificial. Wait a minute. Every time I wrote down that I was black, it wasn't real. Yeah, you were saying you were artificial. Wait a minute. Every time that I decided to sign on the dotted line, it's not even really a line, but it's a micro print that says that I'm authorizing, it says authorized signature. Therefore, I'm authorizing my straw man to be able to be utilized, to be able to use the currency that's being made up by the bank to flow on this fictitious lake. Anyways, yeah, that's what you were doing. Right. It's a very spiritual thing. Now, even think about some of the stuff too. What are some things, what's something that's major in the United States corporation, or they will want you to believe as a country, but what's something that's major that um, is a trinity? What's something that we could say that's major as a trinity? 3 in 1 for the whole United States. Don't think too high, right? Because once again, if we make it too mystical, we'll forget that it's supposed to be practical. What's something that there's 3 of that's supposed to be over the whole United States? There you go. Legislative branch, judicial branch, executive branch. It's a trinity. Why do you have a trinity? Because it's trying to reflect another trinity, and you'll give up your rights to be under the actual trinity to be able to make sure that you bow down to the fictitious trinity. Because the trinity only has power over the United States. And because of the United States, problem is, though, is that the United States is a corporation and not a country. See? So all these judges that you go to see, for the most part, there are some judges that are actually real judges, but most judges that you see are not real judges. They're not even part of the judicial branch, but you'll think they are because they wear the priestly robe. But just because they're wearing the priestly robe doesn't mean they are actual judges, right? They could belong just only to the legislative branch. If they're part of the legislative branch, that means that they actually just belong to Congress. And Congress has no power except within Washington, D.C. or the District of Columbia. Problem with that is that the District of Columbia is not a place. It's not a real place anymore. It's not a territory. It used to be one, but it's not. And it's only subject to Congress. So think about it. D.C. is not a real place. It's subject to Congress. Congress, that only has power in this fake place, has power over it, but has no power outside of it. So the only way that works is that you have to believe that this non-real place and these people that are getting paid that really have no place of authority because they only have authority in a place that doesn't exist anymore. The only way that works is if there's agreement by the people, the actual people. So and what caused that to be? You have all these states that agree to a certain degree of leadership, united together, thinking they have to be under the federal government. Every state has people. The people of Alabama, the people of Maryland, the people of California, the people of Alaska. Those are nations, right? That's why That's why in indigenous places they get to say, the Navajo people. They don't just say Navajo. We are Navajo people. Why? Not because we're trying to say we're human beings. That's something that obviously we would like to be known as, but we're trying to say we are a nation. We're the Khalifa people. We are the Seminole people. We are the Creek people. We are the Gullah people. We are the Yastael people. If my people who are called by my name, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, and a peculiar people, nation. And in your being a nation, that you might bring forth the praises of Yahweh, right? It's all spiritual. And you can't separate the two as much as they want you to believe. That's why it's tricky language. And everybody always says when they say they weren't trying to say separation means blah, blah, blah. But I want you to see, once again, it's legalese. Because, yeah, I get that they're not trying to say separation of church and state means that they want to say that spirituality is separated from the state. But right, because we can look up, actually, let's look that up. Some people might not even know what that is. I think I've talked about that briefly before. But let's even look up the legal definition of church, right? I want to make sure I read it exactly, because people just be thinking this stuff actually means the same thing. So let's look up what the legal definition of church is. Right? So church, or watch this, a congregation, right? There's the concept of that. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, look up the concept of congregation. That's the term of the IRS. What they deem the concept of congregation. It's not what you think, right? But let me start off with this at least. So the tax court defined a church for IRC 170B1AI, blah 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 blah, right? And this is from 1986. So something done in a lot of our lifetimes listening. So the tax court defined a church for IRC 170, etc., which is basically talking about Internal Revenue Code, right? So you can use UCC, USC. Well, here you have IRC. All right. So they did this for the purposes of them to be able to tax things. As a coherent group of individuals and families that join together to accomplish the religious purposes of mutually held beliefs. A lot of people don't know, therefore, there are many different things that you would not consider to be a church, but on paper, guess what? They are churches, and they get tax breaks. Because all you have to be to qualify as a church is what? Once again, a coherent. Now you got to study these terms. What do they mean when they're coherent? But also a lot of times that goes to, can you voice what you believe, and can everybody say it's the same thing? Because you're supposed to do it as a group of individuals and families. So if you're individuals and families, can you guys state this coherently, that you believe in the same thing? You join together to accomplish the religious purposes of mutually held beliefs. This is why important that preachers got to preach the same thing if you're going to be a church. If not, churches get sued, but can't be sued if everybody's on the same thing. But if somebody says, well, I thought that blah, blah, well, I just thought that, well, I said, well, now you're in trouble because you don't share mutual beliefs, at least not to a point. Like, yeah, a certain percentage of y'all cannot believe or have mutual, but if y'all aren't willing to stick to some of the core principles, then we got a problem. But let's look at the word church implies that an otherwise qualified organization bring people together as the principal means of accomplishing its exempt purpose. That's why you tax exempt. the purpose of what you're doing makes you exempt. Spiritual. Because technically, this is the way law works. We've talked about the order of this before. You have kingdom law. Then we're married to the Most High, so that's marital law. So if we're married to Him, then we should be under the universal law, what He spoke into existence, which means we should be into natural law, the laws of of nature, which means that everything we do is now substantiated as a natural person's substantive law. So that means that I know every procedure I do, procedural law, gives me proper remedy for me as a natural human being, right? Remedial law, and I comprehend what it is to be in a sovereign private law. However, when I go into the public, I know how to act public law. Like I have all this together, right? So the word church implies that an otherwise qualified organization, right, bring people together as the principal means of accomplishing its exempt purpose. The objects of such gatherings need not be conversation to a particular faith. So churches can be of different faiths or segment of faith, right? So you can be a mosque and still be put down as a church. You can be devil worshippers and still be put down as a church, because doesn't that mean that it has to be a particular faith. So church, all that stuff doesn't mean the same thing. Once again, we're dealing with legalese. The objects of such gatherings need not to be conversation to a particular faith or segment of a faith, nor the I always mess this word up. Propagation of the views of particular denomination or sect. To be a church, a religious organization must engage in the administration of sacerdotal or sacred functions and the conduct of religious worship in accordance with the tenets and practices of a particular religious body. So you got to be a body. There's got to be something that you'll have. There has to be something, and even in that, we made sure that that's one of the reasons we have all this stuff recorded, and we even say, hey, go to this section. Having been led as we believe, go to this section. FAQ, go to this section. But also, right as we're starting to write this stuff out, we're gonna, you're gonna see the same language. It's got to be something that's kept, and so everybody should be able to say, "Well, I've seen, or I can hear, or hey, where do you guys' belief system say that again? Oh, you can go here, or you can look here, or you can talk to this person, or well, Minister so and so on the staff, they've been trained, and they said blah blah, or Pastor Kofi, you can go directly to him, or like these are things that are there for a reason. So that's why some of the stuff we're extremely repetitive, and also our etymology has to be on point. Why? Because even the way that we are, and by the way, we're not a church. I get, but if we were looking for things to make us exempt from certain things, then all we have to do is basically go by these things. So if somebody says, so yeah, outside of court, yeah, we're an assembly, we're a family, we're an organization. We have members. We're working on membership stuff now, so we have members. But if somebody says, "Well, are you a church?" We'd be like, "Well, our EIN doesn't do blah blah." But as far as like, yeah, we do bring people together as the principal means of accomplishing an exempt purpose, right? And we are a religious organization that engages in administration of sacred functions and the conduct of religious worship in accordance with the tenets and practices of a particular religious body. We're a body of believers to do the same thing. So we could easily go into that language, right? And by doing those things, you can make sure you're protected. It's even telling you that those rights. So that's why if somebody wants to go ahead and get exemption, some people still get those exemptions for shots if they don't want them and stuff. And people are trying to make them now, they're kind of taking that away. But if people still can't get a job because COVID, this and that, or whatever, or you have to get the COVID shot, guess what we do? When we write out the letter, we write out exemption letter, and we go straight to a place of what? Of language that they would consider to be church language, but also, right? And as weird as it sounds, they would say, "Oh, separation of church and state," but we don't separate the two. Well, they say, "Well, you got to separate them." Well, guess what? Separation of church and state. So I'll give you state law, I'll give you church law, I'll give you universal law. I'll put it all in the same thing. So even if you try to separate, even if you try to say, so we have to be, so we try to like be holy. We try to say, well, even if you go to what the world says, the world has law that says da Nuremberg Code says we don't have to do this. Right? If you want to go to the state has allowed, this and this and this, and the United States has allowed and the army has allowed blah blah blah. So that means we cover that. But then also, if you look at the Bible, these verses declare da 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 da, and we believe that the body is a temple, da 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 da. And so we put all that into a nice little note letter, put it on letterhead, or put a letterhead, put on letterhead, and then we send it to whoever needs to be sent to. So, and they have to bow down to that. Why? Because kingdom law comes first. Everything else is subject to the king. Right? It's all spiritual. Like we've talked about before, I can't just go out and say I own dandelion in my backyard and say it's Kofi's dandelion. Why? Because I didn't create it. So I can't patent something I didn't create. So I can't own it. I can sell it especially if I'm doing something to make sure that it can be used by you, right? The workman is worth their hire. That's law. That's spiritual law still, right? But I can't own it. Like, even if you go out, you get some land, it's your house, it's your property, your name is on it. Like, you don't really own it, right? And matter of fact, if you make sure that some people make it into a trust, or write it into a trust or LLC or something like that, or make it part of an LLC, you're basically saying even further, I don't own it. Now, you have to be careful sometimes, because what's happened with a lot of churches is that they don't know how to write law correctly. So a lot of churches are owned more so by trustees than by the trustor, because the trustor is supposed to be the one who wrote the trust. And so you should have a whole bunch of biblical scriptures and law references to scripture when it comes to your church, if it has trustees, because the trustor is the one that writes it. So technically, who's supposed to write all our laws? Yahweh, right? So if you're not careful, you get to a bunch of places where they have a bunch of people who've written a bunch of stuff, and it doesn't make sense. And if you're not careful, people don't know what to protect themselves from. So I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but there have been people who have shown up, and there have been people who, let's say, have wanted to have gay marriage, lesbian marriage, LGBTQ plus marriage, whatever, and they want the church to marry them. Church says, no, we're not going to do it. They say, well, I'm going to sue you. Church says, well, they go to these places where they don't recognize what they're saying. They say, well, I guess, but separation of church and state, we have the right to do blah, blah, whatever. You better make sure it's in the bylaws if that's what you're going by. Because if they take it before a judge, if it makes its way before a judge, might not. But if it does, this has happened before, you might get in trouble because you don't have anything that states what your belief on marriage is. So you may need to write out specifically, this is what we believe, even if it's basics, and then even if it's real basic, and then you put a bunch of scriptures to go with it, so that at least, even if it's something, and you put somewhere in there that somebody who's a teacher of this needs to be the person who interprets this, so you can even protect yourself, because the judge might not be a teacher of your law. Therefore, he might not even, or she might not even be able to deal with it. But better be careful. There's a lot of people out here who think that separation of church and state means that you won't get got, and people getting got because they're not aware of how it works. So even when you get your own property, so to speak, and you start doing it, you probably need to write some bylaws for your property, especially if it's private. If you consider it to be private land, write some bylaws. And if somebody comes on, tries to do something, says you should do this or whatever, you go before a judge, Your Honor, like I told the police officer, he was trying to do this. I told him this was private land. I told him that we have our own bylaws. He didn't want to listen. Well, what makes you think that you can write your own bylaws? Because by my own even spiritual beliefs, right, we believe that the Most High has this, and on this land I made an oath to the Most High. I made a promise to him, and I made an oath to my family. So I made a promise to him twice over. Like, you can actually use language like that. I made a promise. I made an oath to the Most High. I made an oath to my family, and then we made an oath to the Most High together. I made 3 oaths. 3 times over, I promise that this is what the land would be used for. And we wrote the bylaws, and we gave scriptural direction to make sure that it was written in that way. And because it's my land, and my land is allodial, I decided to make sure that we kept it private. And these are things that we do within our land. Now, we haven't done anything that breaks common law as far as, the main 3. We haven't hurt anybody here. We haven't lied to anybody, and we haven't stolen from anybody. Therefore, since there's no loss, and we're sitting here coming to court or whatever, and we're talking about something that's commerce, Uniform Commercial Code, we're talking about something that's commerce, Your Honor. It doesn't really make sense for us to remain here any longer to keep speaking on commerce, when the reality is that The UCC doesn't really have the same function that it has on here because we have our own version of how we would roll with that. And the person's on here saying that I caused some kind of loss or some kind of harm to anybody. I guess the question, Your Honor, is have I harmed anybody? And is there anything that's been lost? Now, my time has been lost. And for me, time is money. So at some point, I actually think that I need to be reimbursed for my time. I don't know who's going to do that, Your Honor. But in the meantime, everything else, as far as law is concerned, I've been honorable. And since you, Your Honor, are honorable, I would assume that you would honor the law. And I didn't use that much, right? I think I used what do I use specifically from tonight that we learned if you came from Sovereignty One? What did I use? UCC 3-603B. I use scripture. I used the legal term of oath, right? Those three things. Spiritual. I tell people, like, if you learn your Bible and you learn how to speak law in the Bible, you'd be surprised how easily it shifts over. It just translates, right? Like all you got to do is learn how to translate it over at this point. Like we talked about before, somebody says you owe money and this and that or whatever. Well, Your Honor, may I ask a question? Sure, right? Because you're always allowed to ask a question. Your Honor, I've been brought here because I owe so-and-so a certain amount of money. So they say, right? Yes, they do say that. And the creditor has brought me before you. Yes, Your Honor. Yes, they did bring you. And Your Honor, I told them this over the phone, but I'm going to try and use it. First of all, my religious beliefs and everything will be respected. Is that true, Your Honor? Well, yes. I don't know what it has anything to do with it. Okay, Your Honor. Thank you so much. Well, if I remember correctly, right, and I swore in the Bible and stuff like that. If you decided to swear, you don't have to. But I swore in that Bible or whatever, and you are supposed to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and of this state against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And so anybody that's trying to mess and manipulate with the law is against is against the UCC, the USC, right? I mean, I guess so. Why? I still don't comprehend your question. Well, Your Honor, I just simply asked the question because as far as owing somebody money, I do comprehend the principle of owing somebody. In our canonical belief, we know and believe that we we technically owe our lives eternally in hell to be subject to hell for eternity because of sin. But we also know that Christ paid the debt. And therefore, since the debt was paid by the creditor, Christ, we comprehend that we don't have, that therefore what I owe doesn't have to be paid. So I get the principle of it. And the creditor took on the debt. And therefore, there was a bill of exchange that he exchanged my place in hell for his place in heaven, even if just for a season, to make sure the debt was paid. And so now all debts have been paid and I'm able to be free. Well, same thing, this company, right? You could literally like turn it over if you know how it works, right? You're thinking you're speaking the same thing. So Your Honor, if I get the concept correct, this company saying I owe them, I felt like they messed up as far as UCC 1-3 or 1-308, where they didn't even honor what they said they would honor, right? And therefore, when they didn't honor the word, just like if I don't honor the word, hell is upon me, they decided not to honor the word. And so rather than deal with the consequences of they're not honoring the word, they're trying to make me the person that has to go and suffer on behalf of what they didn't honor, because I was always honorable. I even gave them the negotiable instrument, gave them a choice, they denied it and all that. However, even with that being said, they're just the creditor. They paid off somebody already and they own the debt now because they paid it off. So Your Honor, the same way that it worked with Christ, and if we're under God, and if the money that we exchange says in God we trust, well, the God that I serve said da 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 da, and like people don't think that work like that works. You're speaking law. Like people do that all the time. I say that all the time. If you can learn how to use law in your Bible, you'd be surprised how many places it translates to. If you know that you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses, and then you know that you need at least 2 or 3 witnesses, you can be included as a witness, and so can somebody else. Or if you bring an affidavit from somebody else, you have 2 or 3 witnesses. All things shall be settled. Right? Like we're just speaking spiritual law. So I know I'm over time. I wanted to make sure that we put that in there and kind of remind you of that, because we get so into this stuff sometimes that we're just looking for the paperwork. We're looking for this, we're looking for that. Don't forget, all this stuff is spiritual, right? Like, they're not throwing anything at you randomly. They're trying to get us, as was said earlier, they're trying to get you to come into the straw man concept and to use something that you believe in to be able to forfeit your rights. But remember, if you believe in it, then it's law. Don't believe in it as legal. Believe in it as law. Don't believe in it as a construct. Believe in it as interpretation. Remember, look up the legal definition of interpretation. Right? Go Google it when you get a chance, and you'll discover that construction is bigger than interpretation. Interpretation is always key. It's always foundational. The construction can be made bigger than the interpretation. So don't get into the constructs. Don't get into the at least their versions of statutes. Make sure that you stay correct in the kingdom. All right. But I'm going to go ahead and take my leave. Thank you guys for being on. I appreciate you all so much. We'll see you guys again. As far as Sovereignty 3, we'll see you guys again Monday. I'll see you guys Tuesday on the live session. Thank you all for being on. Appreciate you. Remember, as always, y'all still that you are loved, you are necessary, you're majestic, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, in you, which is all of us working together, will be the reason why people who are in this system no longer have to be of it. Shalom, family. Peace.